where your mouse is. Okay, there we go. So here's some technical stuff that I want to go over. Wow, that's really bright. Um, so make sure you review the title page format in the new folder for dropping off the hot newspaper. I'll go ahead and give you an updated one that just it says hot news assignment on it. You know, the easy thing to overlook is just often just copying and pasting it in, which is fine. But just make sure you put the actual, like, when it says assignment name, just all you have to do is put hot newspaper. You don't have to put anything fancy or some fancy title for it. That's cool, because if you put, like, you know, spanking is illegal, I'm not quite sure if you're talking about if that's a journal or if that's a hot newspaper. If you just make the actual title of your argument of your assignment just hot newspaper, that'd be great. And you can even put that up in the running head as the name of the assignment. Include word count and section number. So you guys would be section 3. You're section 3. So just make sure that you're putting that in. You want to make sure that you include the plagiarism statement. That's just policy for the college. So it's just required that you have that on there. So make sure you do that. And I know that, you know, it's kind of a pain to sign it. If you type your name in at the bottom with the date, that's serviceable. Please use a clean font. Nothing crazy or fancy. I like a nice sans serif font. These are very thick glasses. I had to pay extra to get them the thin version of, otherwise these would be Coke bottles. And so it's very nice when there is a clean font. You notice I use almost all exclusively sans serif fonts in all of my material. Arial, Helvetica, all of that. Just don't use Courier. I know the trick with Courier, that typewriter font that magically turns a page and a half into 3 pages. Please don't use that. I know that trick because I did it. We were all undergraduates once. Make sure to format double space. This is not only for your page count, plus it'll make you miserable if you don't turn to double space when I'm asking for a 3-page paper and you do it single spaced. That would be miserable because you just wrote a 6-page paper. And the other thing that you need to do is when you're writing it, when you do double space, that gives me opportunities to edit it, because it's a pain in the butt trying to edit a single spaced paper. I used to put print single-sided, but you're sending it digitally now, so don't worry about that. So for basics, make sure that you're using, unless it's like a date, use words instead of numbers. So 13 states voted instead of 13 states voted. You can use numerals for dates, and you can use numerals for numbers over 1,000. If you're just talking about numbers in general. So if you're going over 1,000, go ahead. You can use numbers as well, but just make sure that you're doing that. Do not use contradictions. Contractions. Oh, it's still the morning. Have I finished this yet? There we go. Thank you, caffeine. So do not use contractions. Okay, don't do it. Come on, that was funny.
I have a question regarding the numbers. I don't remember which class it was, but it was maybe like a couple years now. They said after, maybe I'm wrong, so they said maybe after a certain number, you don't have to write it out. Like, for instance, instead of writing the number 13, you spell out 13. Does that apply here, or does it matter? It doesn't matter if it's like 107. Do I have to still write out 107?
Yeah, I think it's up to 1,000. Yeah.
Okay.
So usually, kind of the common rule is once you can write out up to 999. But then after that, you would want to go ahead and write um, over it. You would want to write 1,000. I mean, you would want to write the number for 1,000. Let me go ahead and just do so. I'm 1 second. I'm just going to close my window in the back because it's blowing out my white balance. Okay, so can't turns into cannot, shouldn't turns into should not. And then you want to make sure, avoid double negatives. Things like, there is no evidence to suggest that the proposal cannot pass. What? Why not just say the proposal can pass? So think about it. There is no evidence to suggest that the proposal cannot pass. Well, then why did you just use positive language instead of negative language? And then make sure that you're not using abbreviations for full words. Instead of saying the government states the project is sound, make sure you're spelling stuff like that out. Now, there is a way that you can get away with abbreviations, is if you go ahead and say, like, according to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, you spell it out, but then in parentheses, you put FBI. Then once you've spelled it out and you put the acronym, once you put the the shorthand, the abbreviated version of that, or just the initials for it, in parentheses, you can go ahead and use FBI for the remainder of the paper. So if there's an organization like the WHO or the FDA or the CDC or the NCAA, make sure to spell out what the NCAA is in the beginning, and then just put in parentheses NCAA, and then you can proceed to say NCAA for the rest of the paper. A lot of us do that, and particularly when there's a lot of organizations that you have to list, because that would be a pain in the butt having to write like long names of organizations all the time. So just make sure that you spell it out first, put in parentheses, and then go on next. You want to use single quotes when you're quoting within a quote. So, and then you also want to like list attribution of who you're talking about. So Jacobson notes of Smith's work. So Jacobson's the actual article you're reading, and Smith is the person that he's mentioning. So there are many ways that education policy can be improved upon during this next congressional cycle. And you'll notice that there's single quotes within the quote that are signifying what's Jacobson's quote and what part of that is Smith's quote. So just you want to make sure that you're not using double quotes within the quote, because then the syntax gets all screwy. And then make sure that you're avoiding first person. This is going to be a big one that's that I think just a lot of you are just more comfortable saying, like, I think, I feel, I believe, in my opinion. Get rid of that. Declarative statements are fantastic. For one, it's just a stronger argument. When you're saying, instead of saying like, well, in my opinion, according to the data, it's like, no, just say, according to the data, this is what's going on. That's the great thing about having this type of writing style in terms of research and academia, is that when you look at this, it's much more, the debate is much more interesting, and it's not couched in relatively soft language of saying like, well, in my opinion, or I feel. Doing that almost kind of downplays what you're writing, because you're providing a proviso saying, well, it's just me saying this, but no, like, especially when you're looking at a bunch of like data and evidence and you're combining all of that into something that's useful, make a declarative statement. Instead of saying, I think that the evidence is clear, just say the evidence is clear and give your explanation. You can go ahead and then cite stuff or go through this, but everybody, when you give in like a formal research paper that goes through a whole bunch of this stuff, you don't have to say, I think, I feel, I believe. We know it's you saying it because your name's on the title page. So you don't have to feel like you have to couch your language in all these first person provisos. And here's another thing that I think is a big pitfall. Beware of using way too many pronouns. Use he, she, it, they, them only when it's clear who or what you are referring to. A lot of you have got, I think more than half of you in each of my classes have gotten your papers back for the writing journal, the writing sample. The rest of you are going to be getting those back. I just had a crazy weekend with people getting uh, on my end. Last week was a little crazy. Um, Member of my family ended up getting sick. It wasn't COVID, but we were worried that it was, and so that kind of screwed up all of last week, and really threw me behind. So I want to apologize for lagging it a bit and getting those papers back to you, but I wanted to make sure that those papers get back to you within the next like 2 days, because I want you to have at least some sort of feedback of like what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong, or could be improving for your hot newspaper. And so those are going to get back to you. It's just I had a bit of a crazy week last week. So going back to this, making sure that like one of the things I did see in the writing journals and the writing samples is that there's a use of like, well, it's going to focus because and then when this thing happens, the problem is that you know what you're talking about. I don't. And so you want to make sure that you're being very explicit in what the subject is or what the topic that you're referring to is, because it's very easy to get drowned out in pronouns and then go, wait, what are they talking about? Like, take this for example. I made this I made this up, but just this is kind of indicative of the stuff of what I mean. Administrators want a stricter curriculum, while the teachers in the classroom think some flexibility is beneficial. They think that they will be successful in achieving that. Who and what am I talking about?
The administrators.
Administrators, teachers.
It could be both in that situation, no?
Precisely. Who knows?
Students.
Yeah, it seems like all of them are in that.
Yeah.
So yeah, look how much this could change just by being just a slightly more specific, right? Administrators want a stricter curriculum, while teachers in the classroom think some flexibility is beneficial. Teachers think that they will be successful in achieving that. Or administrators think that they will be successful in achieving that. Even if you still had the general pronouns for the other stuff, just by signifying the subject, it makes more sense. So just keep an eye out for that, because it's one of the like sticky wickets that is a super easy fix, but examiners and professors who are just kind of going through your papers will just be like, if they can't understand it, they're just going to mark it off and keep going, because of time. So the more that you're specific, the more that you'll be able to continue the train of thought. Because remember, people can only hold so many ideas in their head, like it's like 3 to 5 at the same time. So if you start throwing in too many pronouns, that means you're requiring people to remember what you said a couple sentences ago. And I'm sure you've probably experienced this in reading journals and other material for classes where you're like, wait, what are they talking about? And then you got to go back and then read it again in order to make sure that you're able to understand what they're talking about. So don't do it for your own papers. Make sure that you're being specific. You'd be surprised how much like just adding in specific subjects cleans up your paper so much. And then be sure to roadmap your paper. This is what I mean by road mapping is in the last sentence of your introduction. It would be great for you to explain like, what is the purpose of the paper? Like you're gonna see me, like if you don't do this, it's the first thing I'm gonna write all over your paper. Please explain the purpose of the paper. And you can either do like the following paper will do, examine, the role of spanking in America. This analysis will discuss the debate over banning vaping products in the United States. You want to make sure that you declare what the paper is going to go over and what the direction of the paper will be. So explicitly in the paper that you're writing for Hot News, all you have to do for that last one is the following paper will compare and contrast news coverage looking at observing the Stoneman Douglas shooting in 2018. That's all you need to do. Or the following paper will compare and contrast coverage, news coverage of the Iran nuclear deal. Period. You know, that's all you need to do is just kind of let the reader know at the end of your introduction. So what are you doing in this paper? Because what that does is that ends up psychologically priming the reader for what you're gonna be writing. And so it ends up, you'd be surprised, like little stuff like this, like what we were talking about, the pronouns, setting up roadmaps to the paper, you would be shocked of like how much clearer your writing is just by kind of letting people know what you're trying to do. Or what the paper is trying to do. It's really, really cool. And even more so, if you do this like in presentations, not just in this class, but in other classes, professors will like clutch their pearls in just awe and amazement of just like, oh my God, they're so organized. They'll be like fanning themselves, just like, you know, Scarlett O'Hara, like, my Lord, I have a hit of the vapors because of this very well organized presentation. My goodness, this student put together an impeccable title page. I'm not kidding. Professors will do that. They'll sit there and they'll be like mildly impressed because, you know, you knew how to put together a title page without them having to go like, make sure you put the word count in. Please put the date. When you, like, for instance, if you screw up a title page, the thing that you have just told your professor by screwing up a title page, hey, I really didn't pay attention to this title page. So feel free to really rip this apart, because if I couldn't even get a title page right, I probably screwed up a bunch in this thing. So have at it. That is implicitly what people are thinking when the little things are overlooked. Now, on the flip side, the cool thing is if you do all the little things, that you know you might get away with a big thing. So you want to make sure that you do those. You want to make sure that you are getting the little things right, because you know professors and examiners are human. You know, if you give them a reason to think that you really didn't give a damn about the paper and you just kind of phoned it in, well, then you've just given them a license to tear you apart. Whereas if it looks like you're structured, people, just put it this way, when you're grading a paper, people totally judge it by its cover. Oh yeah. So make sure your cover's pretty. And by pretty, I mean, it doesn't need to have like a fancy, please do not use like the Microsoft Word or Google like title page formats. It's cute that you can use those, but I really just want the basics, because that's all you're going to turn in grad school. They don't want any, if you put like the ones like the fancy accent bars and things like that, they're just going to put a red marker and cross out those fancy accent mark lines and go, that's cute, follow the instructions. Yeah, grad school can get really hardcore like that. I've seen someone turn in a paper in late, like 15 minutes because they picked it up, they put it down, the professor just got it and left and just dropped it right in the wastebasket and goes, it's late, it's not accepted. I've seen people getting from, not even from Cal State, but just other grad school programs, where I've heard horror stories about people getting just eviscerated for 25 minutes because of, you know, simple mistakes done in their papers, and then professors will put them up on, will copy it and put it up on the projector, and let's examine how this sentence doesn't work. And you're sitting there going, oh my God, that's my paper. We're spending 20 minutes dissecting why my paper sucks.
Last quarter, one of my professors would do that. He would put up their work or a couple times mine, in fact. So yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Thank you, Andy. You are reinforcing the fact that I speak the truth. I am just put it this way. I'm kind of like your secret, I'm your spy. I've been, I'm relatively, 5 years out of grad school. So I'm still in that area of like, I still care about you guys and I really want you guys to succeed, because sometimes grad school can be really awesome if you avoid the BS. And the thing is, it's really easy to avoid the BS if you just follow a certain structure and pattern. So road mapping a paper is super important to prime your audience and what you're going to be talking about. And the other cool thing is it just makes you look fancy. For like citations for APA, just make sure, don't use the first name of your author. If the author's name is Jane Sanders, say Sanders 2016 argues that equal pay works. Do not say Jane 2016 argues that equal pay works. You're not going to go out with drinks with her later on. You're not on a first name basis. Please use their last name. And consistently use the last name instead of their pronoun. Sanders notes of several studies, instead of saying she notes of several studies. Well, who's she? Like, for instance, you could have been referring to Sanders. Maybe there's two Sanders or two Johnsons. The thing is that or what happens if they have a relatively androgynous name, like Adrian Smith? That could be a girl or a dude. That could be a girl or a guy. So that's another piece of information that doesn't really matter, that we don't have to keep in our heads. So make sure that you're using the last name consistently when you're referring to somebody else's work. So when you're doing this within looking at the three newspaper articles, just use the last name. Just use their last name, because that'll be fun. That'll just be a lot easier for you to read and write, and then for everybody to follow, because then you have to play like the pronoun game of like, let's say you've got 2 women and 1 man, like then you got to keep track of who's he, she said, she said. It's easy for you to get it wrong when you could just say the last name and get it over with, because it doesn't really matter if it's a man or a woman. So, and then in Chicago style, just omit the years in your prose when you're writing stuff like this. If you're writing in Chicago, you just need to omit the years. You'll put that in your notes and bibliography section, your footnotes. Data and evidence. Do not go farther than what the evidence states. If the evidence states that we're going to see coronavirus increases until the fall, don't say that it's the apocalypse. Be careful of editorializing. Don't get into the weeds and giving your personal opinion. It's a research paper, not a soapbox. And so go where the evidence takes you, not your emotions. Here's the thing that you have to realize when it comes to formal research papers. Nobody cares about how you feel. Nobody cares. People care about what you think. And thinking requires research, data analysis, scrutiny, critical thinking, analytical techniques.
Professor?
Yeah.
These are not the same slides that are on the Blackboard, are they?
They should be under writing guidelines.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah. It should be the third one. It should be the latest one. It should be the one that's at the bottom of the list.
Okay.
I hope so. I'll double check afterwards. But be careful on editorializing. Like, don't give your personal opinion. Nobody cares. Like, here's the thing. If the question does not include how do you feel about the subject, then don't answer that. Don't say how important it is, or if there's no question in your prompt that asks about the importance of an issue or the cultural relevancy of an issue, like, don't mention it then, because what will happen is that you'll end up getting into the weeds on this stuff. And then your professor will say, oh, that was a great paper you wrote about the commentary on DACA. Here's your D because you didn't actually answer the question. And so, and they'll be brutal. It's true. I mean, they're expecting, in grad school, they're expecting you to look at the question and just answer the question. Sometimes it's simple to do that. Like, take the hot newspaper that you guys are doing, right? I'm not asking you to give me some like long critique and commentary on whatever story you looked into. All I'm asking you is, what's the paper? Like, what is the story that's being covered? What are the three newspaper organizations or news organizations that were pulled? What was the coverage like, and how is the coverage similar or different among the three sources? That's it. Once you do that, you can say, and this paper went over similarities and differences in coverage on this issue, and these are the three news sources that were analyzed, period, and that's it. Your conclusion could be 2-3 sentences. An introduction shouldn't be more than 4 or 5, tops, particularly on a short paper like this. You don't need to explain yourself entirely when it comes to introductions. All an introduction is a teaser. This is the issue being discussed. This is what's going to be, these are the articles that are going to be analyzed, and this is the purpose of the paper, similarities and differences in coverage. Hey, I just wrote your introduction in 3 sentences. The bulk of your papers should be talking about the similarities and differences in coverage. I even cut the paper down. It used to be 4 pages. I cut it down to 3. Just so I want the majority of the discussion to be either how the data is similar or how the coverage is similar or different. And here's the thing, make sure to include why. Like if you say, well, CNN and the BBC, we're pretty much the same in their coverage. Do not just end there. Tell me why. Like, why were they the same? Did they both did they both pull a quote, an FDA official, and they both use the same quote? Well, if they did, say it. Like the BBC and CNN both cited Gary Jacobson, who mentioned X, Y, and Z, period. The BBC and the New York Times both looked at the same study from the CDC, and they both brought in the same quote from the director of the CDC. So you notice it's only like a sentence or 2, but the worst thing you can do is just give a blanket statement and just say, oh yeah, they were the same. Okay, how? Why? What happened? Like, why are they the same? Like, how are they the same? Like, what did they do? And the thing is, it doesn't have to be like super, super intense. Like even just adding like another sentence or 2 to just explain what you mean is fine. But you can't just leave it at, they were the same, or no, they were like totally different. Well, by the way, don't write like a Valley Girl, by the way. Don't say, oh, well, like it was totally like different. And like the CDC was quoted, but Al Jazeera didn't do anything about it. It's the morning and need to entertain myself.
That was great. I'm sorry.
You and your data proved that. Look, I try to teach by. Is anybody in here? If no one cares to, if anyone's familiar with Judaism, with the Torah, there's a lesson in there that there's a quote from the Torah that I really like. A lesson taught with humor is a lesson learned.
Yeah.
I love that. And so I try and incorporate that as much as I can. It also helps that like most of my advisors were older Jewish grandpa types, so I have a soft spot for that stuff. So let's get back to data and evidence. So here's the thing: there is a P word that is no longer in your vocabulary. It's a scary word. This is basically a swear word. This is like you could list a bunch of profanity and this word would still be worse. Prove. I'll have a stroke. You'll have to find a new professor. Like, I'll have to be woken up with smelling salts because I read prove. You and your data prove nothing. Prove nothing, Mr. Bond, nothing. The data and the evidence that you find supports a claim, it suggests something, it critiques, it could bring into question. It does not prove anything. Nobody says that in scientific circles. Nobody says prove, because to prove something takes years, maybe even decades of research and peer-reviewed testing and critique. It takes a long time. You, in a undergraduate paper on just doing the kind of a lit review, you're not looking at proving anything. You'll notice in even some of the stuff that you've pulled up, none of them say prove. Newspapers will say that crap, but they don't have the same kind of standards in terms of their editorial writing. So don't use the word prove. It can support or suggest or critique or bring into question, but don't use the word prove. Unmute, everybody, unmute. We're gonna have a nice little exercise really quick. It'll be really quick. What word do we not say in this class?
Prove.
Prove.
Prove. Cool.
Prove.
Awesome. Fantastic. Okay, can you mute back again? So yeah, stay away from it. Also, using first person, if it's not the writing journal, if it's not your weekly writing journal or extra credit, those are the only times that you can use I, me, or my. Anything else, I think I'll have another stroke. I think I'll just sit there and have an aneurysm. And then it's like, oh no, there's first person. So don't use it.
Just make sure you get a lot of caffeine when you read those papers.
Oh no, I'm just gonna have like a, but well, you know, the thing is that I have this compulsion that whenever I see I tend to, you know, my wrist has a reflex that just scratches it out and with red and purple ink.
Yeah, my mom's a teacher and she hates it. Like she hates it. She'll be cussing when we're in the other room over the word I. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, because it's not formal written English. It's not a formal paper. It's not it is a big faux pas. It's like showing up to church in a bikini. It's just not acceptable. So the other thing that you want to do is, I don't know why this is screwed up, but review, revise, and edit. Here's a couple of tricks, and I guarantee you this stuff works. Read the paper out loud to yourself. Once you're like working on the paper, read the paper out loud to yourself, like you're a crazy person. It works really, really well. Because the thing is, sometimes we tend not to write the way we talk. And when you talk, you just, because you're so ingrained with the language, you'll tend to catch yourself writing things that go, that doesn't make any sense if I were to say this out loud. Let me try and simplify that. Like you'll notice that like complex sentences that you're trying to put all together, you'll want to probably split up into other sentences when you read it out loud, because you're like, this doesn't really flow very well. It's hard for me to, like, if you're tripping up on saying it, imagine me reading it. So it's a really good way of catching yourself, and you also a great way of catching like syntax and punctuation mistakes too, because sometimes it can go overlooked by word processing. So that's one of the things that you really want to look out for. Like this is like, I know this lecture is like probably my most practical lecture, but I'm telling you, this stuff works. Like I do this stuff, like I practice what I preach, and you know, my boyfriend thinks I'm a lunatic because I'm sitting there like reading out loud like stuff that I've written, because I need to hear it. I need to hear how it sounds, and the cadence of it in order to see if it's actually working or not. And then ask a friend or family member to take a look at your paper. Like we're stuck in the house with other people, you know, have them read your stuff. You know, because here's a good litmus test of a good paper. If someone can read it and have no idea and has no background information on the subject matter, and they can understand what you're writing, means it's good paper. It means that you were able to convey the information that you needed to convey. If they ask questions, that's probably something that needs to be answered. They're like, hey, like, but what about this? Or like, but what did like BBC? But yeah, you talked about like Reuters and Al Jazeera, but like, why you like, you didn't talk about like why Vox was different, but like, what did they do? Like if they call you out on stuff like that, and it's not so much a call out, but if it's out of interest, like, hey, by the way, like you talked about all this other stuff, but what happened here? That's probably a good way of noting, hey, you know, maybe I should include a sentence or two. It doesn't have to be, that's the other thing too. You don't have to add whole paragraphs. Sometimes it's just like 2 sentences explaining what was going on. And you'd be surprised at how much better it just sounds. So the other thing I would recommend too when you're writing your papers, don't, for the love of God, don't write a paper just shooting for the word count or either the word count or the page count. Don't write 3 pages and then go, oh, I'm going to edit it. If you really are running short on stuff to write the 1.5 pages that you're comfortable with first. Like write the whole paper, beginning to end, like, you know, just whatever you're comfortable with. Like I had to write a bunch of memos and recently, and I totally wrote it out of order. I wrote like the middle section first because it was the thing I was the most comfortable with, and then I branched out, and then okay, it would make more sense to talk about this after, and then I should probably talk about this before to set these other 2 things up. You don't have to write linearly. Like you don't have to start writing an introduction. Besides, most of the time, all of you have written papers that the introduction is not the paper you wrote, which, you know, everybody does that. The great way to fix that is instead of changing the paper, just change the introduction. Change the introduction to the paper you actually wrote. Because some people will go like, yeah, this is a great introduction, but you didn't write this paper. You wrote another paper. And all you had to do is just say, hey, this paper is this. Just change the introduction. But yeah, and don't feel like you have to write linearly. You don't have to write the introduction first. If you're really comfortable about like covering what the Reuters article went over, then write that. If you're more comfortable just talking like doing a back and forth about like what was similar and different amongst the papers, and that's the thing you're the most comfortable writing first, like you have it in your head, don't have it sit there because you can't get the introduction right. Just write what you feel the most comfortable with. That's the great thing about having these papers. Right, you don't, for instance, you don't have to write your introductions and conclusions absolutely last either, but write it in whatever's the most comfortable in your head. Like if you have like, oh, I know what I want to say for this, cool, put it down on the paper. That way you don't have to have that sitting in the back of your head while you're trying to figure everything else out. The funny thing is, the more you write, even if it's a complete mess on the paper, you can visualize it like, oh, that's better there. No, that I should put that up there. It's like when you're rearranging a room and it's a complete mess, but you're like, oh, no, the couch should go over here. And you're visualizing it. It's actually, you'd be surprised like how much easier it is once you just, even if it's a jumbled mess of sentences, you'd be surprised how much easier it is to just stare at it and go like, oh, I know how to organize this now.